The fork froze halfway to my mouth when Ethan's voice sliced through our quiet dinner. "So Harold," he said, casual but too casual, "that safe upstairs, what kind of lock does it have?" For a second, the only sound was the clock ticking on the kitchen wall. Olivia nearly choked on her water. "Ethan, why would you ask that?" He smiled, that smooth, polite kind of smile that hides something underneath. "Just curious. You know, with all the break-ins happening in Portland lately." I set down my fork carefully. "Break-ins, haven't heard of any." "Oh, they don't make the news much," he replied, waving his hand. "But I'd hate for something to happen to you, sir. You're living alone in a big house. You must have valuables." That word hung in the air like smoke. Valuables. Olivia forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. "Dad just keeps family stuff in there. Old papers. Nothing worth stealing." But Ethan's eyes didn't move from mine. He was studying me, not studying like a man measuring a lock before picking it. I felt the weight of those years alone, every habit, every hidden drawer, every little detail he might be learning just by watching me. "Don't worry about it," I said, forcing a chuckle. "Everything important's in the bank." Ethan leaned back, the smirk returning. "Right. But sometimes banks can't protect what really matters, huh?" That night, as I washed the dishes alone, the question replayed in my mind again and again. A simple dinner question, but it sounded a lot like a threat. From that night on, the house didn't feel safe anymore. Mornings in Portland had their rhythm, and so did I. At 66, I didn't need an alarm anymore. My body woke up at 6:30 sharp, just as the first light touched the maple trees outside my window. Coffee, newspaper, the faint hum of traffic 2 blocks away. For years, that was enough. My late wife Margaret had left me this house, a quiet 2-story craftsman built in the 70s. Every corner held a memory, her voice drifting from the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon on Sundays, the creak in the 3rd stair she always warned guests about. After she passed, I found comfort in routine. The garden stayed trimmed, the tools on my workbench aligned like soldiers. Peace wasn't something I looked for anymore, it was something I maintained. Then Olivia called. Her voice sounded small through the phone. "Dad, can we stay with you for a while, just until Ethan finds work again?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want her home, but because I knew my daughter. She wouldn't ask unless things were bad. "Of course," I said immediately. "This house always has room for you." 2 days later, their SUV rolled up the driveway. Olivia stepped out first, my little girl, now 32, still wearing that hopeful smile that made her mother proud. Ethan followed, tall, fit, carrying boxes like a man trying to impress. "Nice place, Mr. Mason," he said, glancing up at the house. "Must be worth a fortune in this market." I chuckled politely, but something about the way he said it, flat appraising, put a hairline crack in my comfort. The first week passed quietly. Olivia settled in, reorganized the kitchen, brought warmth back to rooms that had forgotten laughter. Ethan offered to fix the squeaky steps to help out around the place. He watched everything I did, which cabinet held the checkbook, where I kept spare keys, how often I went to the bank. At breakfast, he'd ask questions that felt harmless on the surface. "You ever thought about upgrading your locks, Harold?" "No need," I'd reply. "Never had trouble in this neighborhood." He'd smile. "Still can't be too careful. Someone your age, people target seniors these days." It was phrased like concern, but it sounded like research. Olivia never noticed. She was grateful, genuinely grateful, to have a husband willing to bond with her father. They'd share dinner with me most nights. She'd talk about applying for a new teaching job. Ethan would talk about interviews that never seemed to materialize. He was always on the phone, always stepping outside to take important calls. I didn't pry. But an old investigator's instinct never dies. You learn to read silences better than words. One night as I was heading upstairs, I saw Ethan in my office doorway. "Just admiring your setup," he said, flashing that friendly smile again. "Didn't know you were into home security systems." I followed his gaze. He was looking at the small safe tucked into the bookshelf corner. "It's just for paperwork," I said. "Right?" He nodded. "You keep the key somewhere safe, I hope." Something about the way he emphasized key made my stomach tighten. When I mentioned it to Olivia later, she waved it off. "He's just worried, Dad. You know how he is always trying to fix things." Yes, I thought, especially things that aren't broken. By the second week, Ethan had developed habits, little patterns. He stayed up late long after Olivia went to bed. I'd find him in the kitchen past midnight claiming insomnia, scrolling through his phone with the glow reflected in his eyes. Once I caught him near my desk pretending to look for aspirin. He was polite enough to apologize, but too slow to step away. And that's when I noticed the drawer wasn't sitting flush anymore, a quarter-inch gap barely visible unless you looked closely. My mind filed it away automatically like it had 1,000 times in my career. Drawer disturbed angle, inconsistent probable search. That night as I turned off the lamp, the house felt different. Still quiet, still warm, but somehow watched. The next morning I found Ethan already in the kitchen whistling while making coffee. "Morning, Mr. Mason," he said brightly. "I figured I'd get a head start for you." He handed me a mug before I could protest. "You take 2 sugars, right?" I did. He shouldn't have known that. Olivia came down moments later, cheerful as always, wearing one of her mother's old aprons. The scene looked almost domestic, almost normal, if not for the way Ethan's eyes flicked toward me when she wasn't looking. He was testing me, measuring reactions, learning patterns. After breakfast, I went to my study, closing the door behind me. The safe sat in its usual corner, silent and loyal. I checked the top drawer of my desk. Everything looked fine at first until I reached for the small brass key taped beneath the drawer lip. Gone. My hand froze mid-motion. The tape residue was still warm, the surface clean, like someone had peeled it off gently with purpose. Not a random theft. This was reconnaissance. I checked the rest of the room. Nothing else missing, just small displacements, a paper slightly out of alignment, a file tab bent backward. Someone had been thorough, cautious, and confident. That evening I mentioned it casually over dinner. "Anyone been in my office today?" Ethan didn't look up from his plate. "Why? Something wrong?" "Just thought I left a few things out of place." He smiled without showing teeth. "Maybe you're misremembering." "Happens to all of us sometimes." Olivia frowned. "Dad's memory's better than mine. Don't tease him." Ethan chuckled, but there was tension in his jaw. He didn't like being questioned. After they went upstairs, I stayed behind clearing dishes I'd already cleaned. My reflection in the window looked older that night. Not weaker, just older. The kind of age people mistake for fragility. Ethan clearly did. I sat at the table for a long while, thinking back over 30 years of interviews, confessions, and fraud investigations. Every liar I'd ever met shared one fatal trait: overconfidence. They believed they were the smartest person in the room until the room proved them wrong. The next few days confirmed my suspicions. Ethan began leaving for job interviews that lasted exactly 45 minutes, no more, no less. He'd come back empty-handed, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey. Mail started arriving in his name letters from credit card companies, debt collectors, final notices. Olivia didn't see them. She was too busy trying to stay optimistic. One night she said, "Ethan's under a lot of pressure. He just needs time." I nodded, though I'd already seen the pattern forming: debt lies, and now opportunity me. Saturday evening I caught him again in the hallway. He froze mid-step, holding one of my old photo albums. "Oh, sorry," he said quickly. "Just wanted to see some pictures of Liv as a kid." I took the album from him gently. "You could have asked." "Of course," he said, smiling too fast. "Next time I will." That night I installed a small motion light in my bedroom, not for burglars but for confirmation. At 1:17 a.m. it flicked on for 3 seconds. The floor creaked once outside my door. Then silence. When morning came, the light still glowed faintly, its sensor disturbed by someone who shouldn't have been there. I stood in front of my mirror, buttoning my shirt, watching my reflection harden into something colder than suspicion. If Ethan Turner thought I was just an old fool, he was about to meet the wrong kind of fool. 3 weeks earlier, the world had still been quiet. The phone rang just as I was settling down with the morning paper and a mug of coffee. "Dad?" Olivia's voice was shaky, like she was trying not to cry. "Liv. What's wrong?" A pause, then a tremor of shame in her words. "It's Ethan. He lost his job last month. We've been trying to keep up with the mortgage, but we're falling behind." I didn't let her finish. "How far behind?" 3 months, she whispered. "I hate to ask, but could we maybe stay with you for a while, just until he finds something new?" My daughter had always been independent, too proud for her own good. The fact that she was calling meant things were dire. "Of course," I said, softly. "Come home." The relief in her voice broke my heart. "Thank you, Dad. I promise it won't be long." When they arrived 2 days later, Olivia hugged me like she hadn't since she was a child. "I've missed you." she murmured, tears wetting my shoulder. Then came Ethan's smile-practiced handshake firm. Appreciate you letting us stay, sir. I'll help out however I can. But his eyes told a different story. They weren't looking at me. They were scanning the furniture, the framed photos, the antique clock on the mantel. Appraising, calculating. I pushed the thought aside. He was my daughter's husband. I wanted to like him. That night over dinner, he asked harmless questions. So Harold, you retired from insurance, right? Must have been a good career. It paid the bills. Bet you've got a nice pension? I smiled politely. Comfortable enough. Olivia laughed, cutting in before I could read too much into it. Ethan's just trying to figure out how retirement works. He says he'll never stop working. Ethan grinned. Well, depends on luck, doesn't it? I wanted to think he was joking. Over the next few days, I caught glimpses of something sharper beneath his charm. Phone calls taken in whispers. Receipts crumpled before I could read them. Once I heard him say, "I'll get the money. Just give me time," before noticing me in the hallway. He hung up fast. Telemarketer, he said, smiling too wide. Still, I stayed silent, for Olivia's sake. She looked so happy just being home again, cooking dinner in her mother's kitchen, humming the same old songs Margaret used to sing. But Margaret had also been the one to warn me about people like Ethan. She had a saying, half joke, half truth. The ones who smile the most are often the ones hiding the sharpest knives. I'd forgotten that lesson until now. Ethan's behavior grew more invasive. He'd accidentally open the wrong drawers, offer to run errands for me, and always return just a bit too curious about what I kept locked away. Once I found him in the garage examining the fuse box. "Just checking your wiring," he said. "Old houses can be tricky." Maybe, but I'd lived here 30 years and never once had an electrical issue. I started noticing little things missing, not valuable but personal. A letter opener, a silver pen Margaret had given me, a lighter I hadn't used in years. It wasn't theft, it was testing. He was seeing how much I'd notice. One evening, Olivia and I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the pines. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Feels good to be back home, Dad. Ethan's trying so hard. I think he just needs a bit of faith." I nodded, forcing a smile, because faith was all she had left to get. Inside, Ethan's shadow moved past the living room window. He paused, glancing out at us through the glass. When our eyes met, his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was polite. It was cold. It was dangerous. That night I couldn't sleep. Margaret's words echoed again, the ones hiding the knives, and I realized love doesn't make you blind. It just makes you choose what not to see. From that moment, I knew I couldn't afford to look away anymore. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The house felt too quiet, too alert, as if it knew what I'd discovered. The brass key was gone, and that meant Ethan wasn't just curious anymore. He was ready. At 11:43 p.m., a soft thump echoed from downstairs. Not the creak of wood or the sigh of the heater, but deliberate movement. I held my breath. Then another sound, muffled footsteps crossing the living room floor. Slowly, I slid out of bed, bare feet touching the cold hardwood. The house was dark except for the amber glow of the streetlight spilling through the curtains. I followed the faint vibration of sound until I stood above the old air vent near my dresser, the one that connected directly to the living room below. A whisper rose through the metal grate. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep." Ethan's voice, calm, confident. I crouched lower, straining to hear. "The old man's loaded," he said. "I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the whole thing. We're talking serious money here." My pulse slammed in my ears. He wasn't talking to Olivia. He was talking to someone else. Tomorrow night, Ethan continued, Liv's going to her book club, 7 to 9. Gives us perfect timing. A short silence, then a low voice replied from the other end. I couldn't make out the words, but Ethan's tone hardened. "I already have the key," he said. "Got it while they were eating dinner. The fool keeps everything in that safe, cash, jewelry, probably more bank info. Once I'm done, we disappear." Every word cut deeper. I glanced at the nightstand. My phone sat charging. I grabbed it, thumb trembling, as I opened the voice recorder. "You're sure it's safe?" the other voice asked, distant but audible. "Relax," Ethan said. "He's too old to notice anything missing. Even if he does, Liv will smooth it over. You know how old people get about memory." My jaw locked. Old people. He'd said it with such disdain, like I was some forgetful relic. "I can't wait that long," the voice muttered. "You owe real money, man. They'll come after you." Ethan's reply came sharp. "Then they can come after the cash once I get it. By Thursday, we're out. I'll tell Liv I got a job offer in another state. She'll believe anything I say. I pressed record. The red dot glowed like a heartbeat on my screen. The conversation went on another minute. I caught fragments gambling debt collector's Vegas, but it was enough. He wasn't just a liar, he was desperate. When he finally hung up, I stayed there motionless, the phone still recording the silence. I could hear him moving below, checking locks, pacing, maybe looking up the stairs to see if I stirred. Then his footsteps faded toward the guest room. I ended the recording. 12:07 a.m. Evidence secured. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Rage had a temperature and mine burned cold. He thought he could rob me in my own house. He thought I was too slow, too trusting, too old to notice. He thought wrong. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the faint rhythm of his steps above the creaking floorboards. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh, a con man under my roof planning a heist while pretending to be family. But 30 years as an investigator had taught me one thing: never confront a liar in the dark. You don't win by shouting. You win by documenting. So I opened my phone again and played the recording just to be sure it had captured everything. Ethan's voice filled the room, clear, damning, vile. The old man's loaded. I already have the key. She'll convince him he misplaced it. I stopped the playback halfway through. My chest felt tight, not from fear but from the ache of betrayal. He'd used Olivia's love as a weapon. He'd twisted her trust into camouflage. I wanted to march down the hallway, wake her up, show her the proof. But she would defend him, not out of blindness, but out of hope. And hope is the cruelest liar of them all. Instead, I pulled out a small notebook from my nightstand. Habit. I wrote the date, time, and a summary of the conversation, just like I'd done 1,000 times during investigations. Then I added one more note: objective record proof of intent. Next step. Prepare countermeasure. For a moment I stared at that line pen hovering. Countermeasure. It sounded clinical, detached, but this wasn't just a case anymore. This was my home, my daughter, my name. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the maple branches against the siding like the house itself was whispering back, "Don't let him win." I slipped the phone under my pillow, set the recorder to backup save, and lay down again, eyes open to the darkness. Every creak of wood became a word. Every sigh of wind became a warning. I thought about Margaret, her laugh, her calm eyes, her quiet strength. She would have told me to be smart, not angry. Let him walk right into his own mistake, she'd say. And so I would. When dawn came, I was still awake. The coffee tasted bitter that morning, but the plan was already forming. Tonight, Ethan Turner would try to rob me. Tomorrow, I'd make sure the world saw what kind of man he really was. The next morning, I made sure everything looked ordinary. Same breakfast, scrambled eggs, coffee, 2 slices of toast. Same calm tone, same old man routine. When Olivia came down in her robe, she smiled sleepily. "Morning, Dad. Morning, sweetheart," I said, handing her coffee. "Sleep well, like a rock." Ethan appeared soon after, wearing that practiced grin. "Morning, Mr. Mason." I matched it. "Morning, son." He sat across from me, poured sugar into his cup, and asked casually, "Got any plans for today?" "Just errands. Might run by the hardware store." He nodded too quickly. "Anything I can help with?" "No, thank you." The muscle in his jaw twitched, the smallest tell of disappointment. He thought I'd be home all day, easy to monitor. But I had other plans. After breakfast, I loaded my old pickup with a few boxes, props really, and drove into town. I stopped first at the hardware store, then at a Best Buy tucked behind a strip mall. The young man at the counter badge reading Marcus greeted me with a practiced smile. "Looking for something specific today, sir?" "Yeah," I said. "Something small, wireless, good night vision, security camera." "Exactly." He showed me a sleek black model barely larger than a deck of cards. "This one's got motion detection, real-time feed, 8 hours of battery. Connects right to your phone." "Perfect." I paid cash. Before leaving, something in the display aisle caught my eye, a shelf of party supplies, including a few confetti cannons, spring-loaded, harmless, designed for gender reveals. A strange idea began to form. Marcus noticed me staring. "Fun occasion coming up." "Something like that," I said. "Let's call it a surprise party." Back home, the house was quiet. Olivia's car was gone grocery run, judging by the note on the counter. Ethan's jacket still hung by the door, but his truck was missing. Good. I had time. In the basement workshop, I disassembled the confetti cannon on my workbench. The mechanism was simple spring pressure plate trigger. I replaced the colored paper with a fine mix of gold and silver glitter, the kind that clings to everything. If Ethan was going to rob me, he'd leave glowing evidence on every inch of his skin. After testing the trigger with a spoon, I found the right pressure. Too light, it'd go off early. Too heavy, and it wouldn't trigger. I needed it perfect. Upstairs, I inspected the dresser in my bedroom, the one Ethan had already searched. I placed the modified cannon deep inside the second drawer, angled upward toward where a hand would reach for the key. Then I slid an old luggage key almost identical in shape near the front of the drawer, taped just loosely enough to look hastily hidden. The trap was psychological as much as mechanical. Thieves always reach for what they think they see. I tested it twice more. Glitter burst across the air, each time shimmering under the lamplight. I smiled despite myself. Effective, I murmured. Margaret would have called it poetic justice. Next, the camera. I carried the small device upstairs, connecting it to my phone app. Its view appeared crisp infrared mode, perfect for night. I tested a few angles on the bookshelf, too obvious. Behind the lamp, too narrow. Finally, I nestled it between two books on my nightstand, angled toward the dresser. The black casing blended perfectly with the shadows. Through the live feed on my phone, I could see everything. The door, the dresser, even the reflection of my bed in the mirror. When I waved, the image moved a second later, crystal clear. I let out a long breath. Now we wait. By the time Olivia returned, I was sitting in the kitchen pretending to read the newspaper. "Need anything, Dad?" she asked. "Just peace and quiet." I smiled. Been a busy morning. Ethan came in behind her carrying grocery bags. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp and searching before softening. "How were the errands?" he asked. "Productive," I said. "Picked up a few things for the house." "What kind of things?" "Just something for safety." His smile faltered. A flash of uncertainty passed through his expression before he recovered. "That's smart, Mr. Mason. Got to keep up with the times." That night over dinner, Olivia chatted about work applications. Ethan barely ate. His gaze kept drifting toward the staircase, toward the second floor. "Toward my room." "You look tired, Dad," Olivia said. "Long day," I replied. "Think I'll turn in early." Ethan's head tilted slightly, calculating. "Early night, huh? Guess you'll sleep well." "Oh, like the dead," I said, smiling into my glass. Later, when the dishes were washed and the lights dimmed, I checked my setup one last time. The drawer armed, the camera streaming, the phone charging beside the bed. I lay down fully dressed. The glow from my phone screen fading to black as I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see how smart you really are, Ethan." Downstairs, I could hear faint laughter. Olivia's soft and genuine, Ethan's strained and hollow. He thought I'd be asleep soon. He thought I'd be an easy mark. But tonight, the hunter would walk straight into the trap. Before closing my eyes, I looked once more around the room. The faint moonlight fell across the dresser, soft and silver, brushing the corner of the trap like a secret waiting to be told. I thought of Olivia, how she still believed kindness could fix everything, and I promised myself that by morning she would know who her husband truly was. The house felt alive around me, humming with silent judgment, every floorboard holding its breath. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel old. I felt ready. It happened at 2:43 a.m. The house was still wrapped in that strange kind of silence that comes before a storm. I'd been lying there for hours, eyes half open, my breathing slow and steady, rehearsing every sound an old man might make in sleep. Then the faintest creak on the stairs. He was careful, I'll give him that. He avoided the noisy third step. I'd watched him learn that pattern over the weeks, studying me like I was a safe combination. The hallway light flickered as he passed the nightlight outside my door. A shadow moved under the crack. Then the knob turned slow and deliberate. My door opened without a sound. Through the tiny gap of my eyelids, I watched Ethan slip inside. He wore dark clothes, gloves, and that same confidence he'd carried since the day he moved in. A thief in his own father-in-law's house. He paused, listening to my breathing. Satisfied, he crept toward the dresser. My phone on silent mode streamed everything through the camera app. I could see him on the small screen glowing beside my pillow, a ghostly figure moving in night vision green. He reached the drawer. His movements were precise, almost elegant. He knew exactly where to look. The drawer slid open. His hand went in, boom. A sharp pop exploded through the room, followed by a blinding shower of gold and silver glitter. Ethan screamed, stumbling backward, covered head to toe in sparkling dust. The confetti cannon had detonated perfectly, marking him like a carnival criminal. What the? He gasped, clawing at his face. The glitter clung to him, caught in his hair, his eyebrows, his mouth. I sat up slowly, performing my best startled act. Ethan. What's going on? He froze, blinking in the sudden light as I reached over and flicked on the lamp. The scene was absurd. He looked like a disco ball had exploded in his hands, every inch of him glittering, guilty and speechless. I heard a noise, he stammered. Thought someone was breaking in. Breaking in, I repeated. At 3 a.m, into my dresser. He opened his mouth, but only a cloud of glitter fell out. From down the hall came Olivia's footsteps, quick and frightened. Dad? What happened? Just a small explosion, I said evenly. Nothing to worry about. When she appeared at the door, her jaw dropped. Ethan, why are you... What is all that? He looked down at himself, panic setting in. Some kind of trap. It just went off. I came in here because I thought... You thought what? I asked, my voice steady. That burglars hide in my dresser drawers. Olivia's expression shifted from concern to confusion. Wait, why were you in Dad's room? Ethan's hands twitched, sending more glitter into the air. I heard a noise. I was checking. Checking what? She pressed. You were supposed to be asleep. I folded my hands calmly. Olivia, sweetheart. There's something you should hear. Dad. What? I reached for my phone on the nightstand, opened the file and hit play. Ethan's voice filled the room. Cold, confident, unmistakable. Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep. The old man's loaded. I already have the key. Olivia froze. Her eyes widened in horror as she turned toward her husband. What is this? Ethan's face went pale beneath the glitter. That's not... Keep listening, I said quietly. From the phone came the rest of it. The gambling debts, the plan to rob me during her book club. The mocking tone. You know how old people get about memory, his voice sneered. When the recording ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than any explosion. Olivia's breath hitched. You called my father an old fool. Liv, you planned to rob him. You were going to use me as cover. Ethan's glittered hands reached for her, trembling. I didn't mean... It was just talk. I was desperate. Olivia stepped back. Desperate enough to betray my family. Her voice cracked sharp and furious. You live in this house, eat his food, call him Dad, and you plan to steal from him. Liv, please. No, she said. Don't you dare call me that. He turned to me, then wild-eyed like a cornered animal. You set me up. I met his glare. No, Ethan, you set yourself up. I just turned on the light. He looked ready to explode again, but Olivia's voice cut through the air like glass. Get out. He blinked. What? Get out of this house, right now. Liv, you can't. She pointed toward the door. Before I call the police. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, glitter sparkling on every twitch of muscle. For a second I thought he might lunge, but then he saw something in my eyes. The kind of stillness that comes from someone who's already decided what happens next. He left. We heard him in the guest room throwing clothes into bags, muttering curses. Then the front door slammed, leaving the house wrapped again in heavy silence. Olivia sank onto the edge of my bed, face pale, voice trembling. Dad, I didn't see it. I didn't want to. I rested a hand on her shoulder. That's how trust works, sweetheart. You never see the knife until it's close enough to cut. She cried then, not loud, not dramatic, just soft, steady tears that sounded like release. When she finally looked up, she managed a weak smile through the shimmer in her eyes. You caught him with glitter, Dad. Only you. I chuckled, exhausted. Sometimes justice needs a little sparkle. Outside, dawn was just beginning to break, turning the window glass gold, a quiet end to a long night. Ethan had tried to steal my peace. Instead, I took back my home. He wanted money. But what he really lost was everything that ever mattered. Morning came slow, like the house itself was hesitant to wake. The golden light slipped across the floorboards, catching on the stray bits of glitter that still clung to everything. It was as if the night refused to leave, quietly fragments of the chaos frozen in place, shimmering reminders of what had happened. Olivia was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She wasn't humming like she used to. She moved quietly, almost reverently, wiping the counter again and again, though it was already clean. "Morning," I said softly. She didn't look up. "Morning." The coffee pot gurgled between us, filling the silence with a steady rhythm. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "There's glitter everywhere. It's like it's never going to come off." I smiled faintly. "That's kind of the point." She didn't laugh. Not yet. We sat across from each other, both with untouched mugs of coffee cooling between our hands. The air smelled like toasted bread and something heavier, that mix of shame and relief that comes after the truth finally shows itself. "I keep thinking about last night," Olivia said finally. "About how you knew." I didn't know, I said. Not at first. I just listened. Her eyes were red from crying. "You shouldn't have had to protect me like that. I should have seen what he was." I shook my head. "No, Liv. You saw what you wanted to believe. We all do. That's not weakness, that's love." She looked away, tears glinting in the sunlight. "Love made me blind." Maybe I said, but it also makes us brave enough to face the truth when it finally arrives. For a long moment we just sat there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of a mourning dove outside the window. "I feel stupid," she said. "Everyone warned me. Even Mom did, back when she was still here. She said Ethan always smiled too wide when he wanted something." I chuckled softly. "Your mother had a good eye for liars. Did you ever think he'd turn out like that?" I paused, considering. No, but I saw pieces of it. The way he looked at things, not people. The way he always had an answer ready. She exhaled slowly. "I wanted him to be good dad. I needed to believe I hadn't made another mistake." I reached across the table and took her hand. It was trembling cold despite the warm mug beside it. "You didn't make a mistake, sweetheart. You made a choice based on who you were at the time, kind, hopeful, trusting. That's not something to be ashamed of." Olivia's lips trembled. "You always make things sound so simple." "They usually are," I said. "It's just that people prefer complicated stories because they make pain feel more meaningful." That earned a weak laugh. "You sound like Mom. She taught me well." We fell into silence again, but it was lighter this time, not the suffocating kind. I watched as sunlight crept along the edge of the table, hitting the coffee mug just right, so a single fleck of gold glitter floated inside the dark surface. It caught her eye too. "Even after everything she whispered, it's still beautiful. That's life," I said. "It leaves marks, but sometimes they shine." She wiped her cheeks finally, letting herself smile, small, fragile, but real. After breakfast, we started cleaning. Glitter on the rug, glitter on the banister, glitter in places no glitter should ever be. Every time we thought we'd gotten it all, the light would shift and reveal more. "Persistent little things," she muttered. "Reminds me of you when you were 5, I teased. You spilled paint once and swore you'd cleaned it all. I still found blue streaks under the stairs 3 years later." She laughed, the sound a little freer this time. "Mom yelled at both of us for that." "She did," I said, smiling. "But then she made hot chocolate and said, 'Accidents are proof we're alive.'" The memory warmed the room. For the first time since the night before, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt lived in again. When we finally sat down on the couch, the morning sun had climbed high enough to flood the living room in light. A few stray sparkles floated through the air like dust made of forgiveness. "Dad." Olivia said quietly, "What happens now?" I leaned back. "We move on. You file for divorce. He deals with his mess." She nodded. "And you?" "I'll change the locks," I said with a smile. "Maybe upgrade the security system. Might even keep the glitter cannon, just in case." That made her laugh, a full laugh this time, unguarded and bright. When it faded, her eyes softened. "You really aren't mad, are you?" "I was," I admitted, "for about 10 minutes. Then I realized anger wouldn't build anything back. It just burns what's already broken." She studied me for a moment. "You're stronger than I am." "No," I said. "I'm just older. Strength comes from surviving enough to know which fights are worth your breath." She leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "I miss Mom." "Me too," I said. "Every day." She would have known what to say. She would have said this, I murmured. "Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about clarity." Olivia smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." It was. The clock ticked softly in the background. For a while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Finally, Olivia whispered, "I'll be okay, Dad. I know you will," I said, "because now you see the world a little clearer and it still hasn't made you bitter. That's rare." Outside, a neighbor's car started. The day carried on unaware of the quiet victory inside our walls. Later, after she went upstairs to shower, I walked through the house alone. The bedroom still smelled faintly of smoke from the confetti burst. Glitter sparkled on the carpet like constellations. I stood by the dresser, running a hand across the surface, remembering how cold my anger had felt the night before and how strangely peaceful it felt now. Maybe peace isn't the absence of betrayal. Maybe it's the decision to stop letting betrayal define you. I picked up one lone fleck of gold from the floor, held it between my fingers, and watched it catch the sunlight. It glowed for a second, then slipped away into the breeze from the open window. By the time Olivia came back down, her hair damp and her eyes clearer, I was back at the kitchen table refilling our mugs. She joined me silently, sitting across again. "Same spot, new air. Dad," she said softly. "Yes. Thank you. For protecting me. For trusting me enough to see the truth myself." I smiled. "Thank you for believing me when it mattered." We sat there side by side as morning turned to afternoon. The last traces of glitter shimmered in the light between us. "Guess some scars still shine," I said quietly. Olivia looked down at her hand where a tiny sparkle clung to her skin. "Then maybe they're not scars," she said. "Maybe they're proof we survived." And for the first time in a long while, the house felt like home again. 3 months passed before I realized I'd stopped checking the locks twice every night. The house had settled again, quiet, trustworthy, no longer holding its breath. The glitter was mostly gone now, though every once in a while sunlight would still catch on a stray fleck embedded deep in the carpet, a stubborn reminder of how chaos had once shimmered through these walls. Olivia came by every weekend. She looked different now, calmer, stronger. Her hair was shorter, her smile quieter, but there was a steadiness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She'd taken a job at the downtown library. "It's peaceful," she'd said the first week. "Books don't lie, they just wait to be read." I told her that made her sound like her mother, and she'd smiled the same soft smile Margaret used to give when she knew she was right. Saturday mornings had become our ritual. She'd bring pastries, I'd make coffee. We'd sit by the kitchen window while the city slowly came alive outside. That morning was no different. She walked in carrying a paper bag. Her cheeks flushed from the chill outside. "The usual, Dad, 2 cinnamon rolls and one you'll pretend not to eat until I leave." I grinned. "You know me too well." "I should," she said, setting the bag down. "I'm your daughter." We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of spoons against porcelain and the faint hum of the heater filling the space between us. "How's work?" I asked. "Busy. We had a poetry reading yesterday, local writers. There was this one woman, maybe 80, who wrote about her garden as if it were a cathedral. Everyone cried. Sounds like a good kind of busy." She nodded. "It is. I like helping people find stories that make them feel less alone." I looked at her for a long moment. "You sound happier." "I am," she said simply. "I didn't think I could be, but I am." Outside, a neighbor waved as he passed by walking his dog. That was Tom Whitmore. His wife had been the first to ask me for help setting up a security camera after hearing about the glitter incident. The story had spread faster than gossip at church. The old man who caught a thief with sparkles, it had become neighborhood legend. People stopped me at the market half laughing, half impressed. "Mr. Mason," they'd say, "is it true you turned your son-in-law into a disco ball?" I'd smile and reply only metaphorically. The real damage was to his pride. At first I found the attention embarrassing. But over time I saw something in it, the way neighbors began locking their doors again, checking in on one another, sharing stories about trust and second chances. Maybe a bit of glitter had done more than expose one man. Maybe it had reminded everyone how fragile peace really is. That afternoon, Tom knocked on my door holding a toolbox. "Need help with your front latch?" I asked. He chuckled. "Other way around, Harold. Heard you're the neighborhood security expert now." I laughed, inviting him in. "Don't tell anyone but my secret weapons craft supplies." By the time Olivia came back from the library the next day, I'd installed 3 more cameras, one for Mrs. Whitmore, one for Tom, and one for the elderly couple across the street. Word was spreading, and it felt good to be useful again. Retirement had always felt like a quiet erasure, a slow fading into the background. Now I had purpose again, not revenge, not vigilance, just purpose. That evening, Olivia and I sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass in slow silver ribbons. She held her mug close, breathing in the steam. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked softly. "Ethan," I said. "Sometimes, less than I used to. Me too. The weird thing is, I'm not angry anymore. Just tired. That's how healing starts," I said, "when anger finally gets tired enough to rest." She nodded, staring out at the rain. "I don't hate him. I hate what he did. But if I keep holding on to that, I'll never trust anyone again." I looked at her proud and a little sad, then let it go. Forgiveness isn't about him, Liv. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of remembering. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain tapping against the window. Then she said, "You've forgiven him, haven't you?" I thought about it. The image of Ethan covered in glitter still flickered in my mind. Ridiculous, pitiful human. "Yes," I said quietly. "I have. I didn't want to, but I did, because carrying that hatred means he's still stealing from me." She smiled faintly. "Mom would be proud of you." "Of us," I corrected. The conversation drifted after that, but the peace stayed. Later that night, after she'd gone home, I walked through the house one more time as I always did before bed. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet cedar and clean beginnings. I paused by the dresser, the same one that had once been ground zero for betrayal and absurd justice. When I leaned closer, I saw it one tiny speck of gold still stuck between the wood grain and the metal handle. I tried brushing it away, but it wouldn't move. I laughed softly. Persistent little thing. Maybe it was meant to stay there, a scar the house decided to keep, not out of pain, but memory. I turned off the lamp, and for a second, I swore I heard Margaret's voice in the quiet. "Justice fades, but kindness stays." I smiled into the darkness. "You were right, love. Always were." The next morning, I woke early to find sunlight spilling through the curtains, painting the walls with soft gold. I made coffee, opened the front door, and breathed in the smell of rain-soaked earth. Across the street, Tom waved. Mrs. Whitmore called out, "Morning glitter man." I laughed and waved back the nickname, no longer embarrassing, just part of the story now. As I stood there, cup in hand, I realized something Margaret had always known. Life doesn't return to what it was before the storm. It becomes something different, smaller, quieter maybe, but stronger. And in that quiet I found peace, not the fragile kind that fears disturbance, but the steady kind that survives it. It was early evening when the letter came. No return address, just my name, Harold Mason, scrawled in rough, hurried handwriting across the envelope. The paper smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and rain. I turned it over in my hands for a moment, then tore it open. Inside was a small brass key identical to the one Ethan had stolen months ago, and a folded scrap of paper. 4 words. "You think it's over?" I stared at the key, the metal cold against my palm. For a long time, the world outside kept moving. Cars passing, children laughing somewhere down the street. But in my kitchen, everything stopped. There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. I could almost hear his voice. That same smooth confidence turned brittle at the edges. Olivia wasn't home yet. She'd stayed late at the library covering an evening shift. I set the letter on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to decide whether this was a threat or a cry for help. The house, once peaceful again, felt different. Not unsafe, but awake. The floorboards creaked, the refrigerator hummed a little too loud, and the ticking of the wall clock seemed to echo inside my ribs. I walked to the living room window. Across the street, a black sedan idled for a few seconds before pulling away. The taillights disappeared into the dusk. Coincidence, maybe. Maybe not. I looked down at the key again, turning it between my fingers. It was identical in weight and shape, but newer, shinier, as if it hadn't been used yet. Margaret's voice whispered somewhere deep in memory. "Justice ends when peace begins." I slipped the key into my pocket and exhaled slowly. "Maybe peace can wait a little longer," I murmured. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the city, the first storm of spring moving in. And in the faint reflection of the window, my own face looked back calm, unafraid, and ready. Because if Ethan Turner had come back to finish what he started, he wasn't the only one prepared this time. Fade out. Voices fade, but guilt echoes louder. If this story touched you, leave a comment not for us, but for those still searching for peace. Subscribe for the next echo, because some stories never end. They just wait for someone to listen. Thank you for watching.